This episode is brought to you by Pentester Academy.com, the leader in online cybersecurity education. Also brought to you by Hacker Arsenal, artillery for cyber warriors. Be sure to check out our latest attack defense gadgets on hackerarsenal.com. Hey everyone, I'm sitting down here with Kevin McPeake today. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure.
So now, is this your first time at Hardware.io conference?
This is my first time that I've actually got to attend it, but I did help a little bit last year in the original organization of it. And this year I was really glad to be able to be here to be more hands-on this time.
Nice. And what made you want to get involved with it in the first place?
Well, I've been actually very active in the hacker and security community for about 15, 20 years. I originally debuted on stage at DEF CON 8 on a vulnerability disclosure for Lotus Notes. So ever since then, I've been active with Hack in the Box, with DEF CON, Black Hat, and I work with the organizers for putting on the events here in the Netherlands, since I do actually come from the United States and live here now. So that's kind of works out well. And it was just natural for people. One person said, yeah, we know Kevin. Hey, Hardware, I'll talk to him. He can help out. And here I am.
Nice. That's awesome. Okay. And so now, what do you currently do for a living?
So for 15 years before, I was actually working in telco security as a senior security specialist, cybersecurity specialist, and digital forensics investigator. And from there, so that's what I did in the day job. In 2016, I actually went freelance with an idea to go to the next level and start talking about ethics in computer security. And I also wanted to pursue a little bit, have more time to pursue in the area of photography, which was a personal love for me, and coral farming.
So can you, for the average viewer at home, could you explain to me what coral farming is exactly?
Well, yeah, because so essentially, if you think about somebody who's got like an aquarium and they set up a reef aquarium in their house, that's sort of starting to go down that track. But I've taken it a bit to the next level. And where you've got a lot of people here at this conference talking about biohacking their bodies, what I'm doing is I'm actually trying to biohack the ocean in my own living room. And so I've actually got a 1,500 liter aquarium that's the big display tank that has a reef in it. But we have 11 other tanks also in my house, and most of them are interconnected, and I manage them through my own aquarium controller, which is a collection of Raspberry Pis and Arduinos that I built myself, because I didn't find any aquarium controllers on the market that were truly scalable for somebody like myself. One of the things I'm doing with all this is I've been for about 20 years concerned with corals and have had a passion for them. I've actually watched as the bleaching went from just one-off events that were normal to becoming widespread events. We know this because, contrary to popular belief, it wasn't the climatologists who discovered this. It was people in our hobby who were the local indigenous people who collect the corals, and we're out in the reefs every day. We're the first to document, and they told us about it. And we started raising the alarm, and climatologists got on the bandwagon and everything else. But we've been watching this for a long time, and one of the things that I do with my corals is I've been trying to focus on how can I optimize conditions scientifically for raising corals and causing them to grow faster than they actually grow in the wild. And you often hear, it depends on the coral, but sometimes coral growth rates of 1/2 an inch to 1 inch a year. I'm growing at something staggeringly larger than that. So about annually, I pull out anywhere between 2 to 4 20-liter buckets full of living corals that I am able to sell or trade on the market. And in fact, I was the only local supplier for the largest importer-exporter of corals, which happened to be here in The Hague, just down the street from my house. And we had a very comfortable relationship for about 7 years. Unfortunately, he passed away, and they shut down the business. But that motivated me to realize I'm leaving money on the table. I'm not furthering any of this, and I basically stood back and I looked at the coral problems we see. We've seen the movie recently called Chasing Corals, and they're asking for people to get involved. And I'd already been looking at this for a long time, thinking the way that we currently practice coral preservation. We go to a damaged site where there's been bleaching, and we take a little corals from where they're still existing in that same area and put it in the area where they died off. This works for the short term, and as long as nothing else ever happens in that area again, it's sustainable. But in an age of climate change and looking at various other things, all the different variables that could be out there, we know from my own profession in security, from a risk methodology approach, this is not the way to do this. In fact, if I look to business continuity practices, there's much better approaches we should be taking. And one of the positions I'm advocating is we not only need to be doing what we are currently doing right now, we need to add more layers of what I call backups for this. And literally, one of this is to literally pull the corals out of the ocean, which we've already done for consumers, people that like decorative corals in their house and everything else. But I think we can take principles that we've learned from Airbnb, learn from the new generation of Ubers and things like this, the companies that don't actually need to own their assets. Why can't we set up a company like this, maybe even a nonprofit, that would actually database corals collected in individual homes through a volunteer basis, with possible even financial remuneration, so to help further drive forward as a solution to conservation. And the reason I did this was because everyone talks about coral preservation and we need to do something, and there's a lot of alarmism, and I like the awareness, I don't like the emotional alarmism, because we don't think logically then. We get too emotional. We look at somebody with a tank and we think, oh, he's ripped corals out of the ocean, how horrible. And then I have to explain, you understand, the corals that have in my tank, are actually the offspring of the corals I've been growing for the last 13 years. I've actually been able to stop the harvesting of corals from the ocean because people come to buy corals from me instead. And they actually don't mind paying a little bit more for that because they know there's no carbon footprint for this, like there is for getting corals, put it in a bucket full of heavy water and fly it or ship it on a boat. You know, the carbon footprint for that's huge. So if we can do this locally, that's much more sustainable. But then there's the aspect for both, not just preservation and conservation, but medical use. So if an academia and university needs to, we want to study this coral because we think that the Nemo cystinate contain a particular agent that may be able to help us in the fight against cancer, they won't, here in the Netherlands, in my vision, they won't have to go to the oceans anymore to get this. They'll be able to come to our facility and say, these are the corals we need, the species we need, and well, we can take them right from our tanks, been aquacultured in better quality conditions than what we have in the ocean. And that same stockpile could also be used to resupplement the oceans if a climatic, say the Ross Ice Shelf collapses tomorrow and something really bad happens that takes out the whole Great Barrier Reef and makes the Great Barrier Reef not the place to restock those corals. We may have to do it in a new location. We will already need to have an existing backup of all those corals offline, out of the Mother Nature's environment and our controlled environment, to have in order to restock them back in the oceans. So what I'm looking now is trying to create both the applications and the expertise on how to do this, and also as an outpouring and a facilitator of this to create probably the first coral hacking space here in the Netherlands, where you can come down and tinker with technology, learn how to solder, and learn about oceans, learn about the ecosystems, learn how to even grow seahorses or corals. So I right this minute I've got like 120 baby Nemo fish in my sitting in a special grow out tank, but I've also bred and grown out seahorses. And if you stop to think about our ocean, we treat as an infinite supply. And particularly, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody, I could point to any country and say we're doing bad things, but just as one example, my country's dumping tons of toxic waste, and we know the staghorn coral off the coast of Florida isn't dying from climate change, it's dying from human feces that we're pouring in the ocean. So we need to create more awareness about this. We also need to come up with solutions. How are we going to solve these problems? And in this regards, most of the marine biologists are already overwhelmed. Our academic institutions are ill-equipped to do this. So I'm now thinking, why cannot the hacker community do this? We already know how to do so much of this. Maybe those 20% left that we don't know how to do it, but I'm pretty sure we can figure out how to do this. So that's my objective with creating like a coral hacker space. So maybe it's somebody who I've never even seen a coral. Or I've got some kids, we live inland here in the Netherlands, and we don't get to the ocean much, but I'd like to take my kids to go see some corals, see some seahorses, sea stars. They could come down and see, even learn. They could, the idea would be you get a membership and you could come down, learn about this. You could set up your own tank there if you don't have a big enough flat to do it in your own house. And we could do various other services. Even if you end up growing corals, we could sell it back through as a nonprofit with a commercial front to help supplement the financing for the organization itself. So my approach is try to take it, and I'm very much of a libertarian living in the European society, but I'm looking for something that doesn't require government bureaucracy, not so much regulation, and actually gives us financial incentives for really doing this and not just aligning with it, but empowering ourselves with it, so that we actually come up with a real workable solution rather than just a whole bunch of worrying about what's going to happen.
Yeah. That is absolutely incredible. That has such a big impact today, because I know that recently there was a lot of emotional distress with the Great Barrier Reef recently, that it's going to be depleted, in the near future. So, yeah.
In this regards, I always like to look towards solutions. And you can sit here and look at the problem for a little while, and you always should, so you can understand what needs to be addressed. But I think there's some point we need to stop talking and start doing. And that's really, hackers are doers. And that's one thing I'm really hoping that I can leverage. It was great because this is the first time I've come to a computer security conference and said, hey, here's my idea for coral hacking. And people went, but it was great because this is a hardware conference, and there were people talking about biohacking, and certainly there was definitely a lot of traction I gained here. It was better than I expected. I didn't be expecting to do this interview, to be honest. So
yeah, no, this is so different and interesting that you wouldn't even think that it does correlate with, the cybersecurity community, but it completely does.
It does, because if you stop to think about it, I think when we were kids, some of us may have been taught that the trees are responsible for all of the oxygen on the planet, and then we grew up and we figured out it's actually the ocean. It's the phytoplankton in the ocean. It accounts for 70% of the oxygen. And the phytoplankton gets its fertilizer, its nutrients, from the coral reefs. So if the coral reefs die, the phytoplankton won't be fertilized like it currently is, and we won't have as much oxygen. And then we'll have big problems.
Okay.
Forget about carbon dioxide.
Way worse than that, absolutely. Yeah. So now, so since this is just starting out and it's, a growing opportunity, if somebody does want to get involved in this, given your experience, what's the best way they can start to get involved with this?
Well, it depends. I mean, if they're local here in the Netherlands, let's get in touch. Let's go out for a drink and let's talk. My idea is to make this truly reproducible. And my idea is to put this out there underneath the Creative Commons or GNU license and say, go forth with my model and do in your own local. It's all based on the idea of think globally, act locally. And if we can think globally about these solutions and act locally, there's so much we can already do in this regards. And I've done this in other areas, so I'm sure we can do this here too.
Absolutely. That's incredible. Thank you so much for sitting down and speaking with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
This episode was brought to you by Pentester Academy, the leader in online cybersecurity education. Also brought to you by Hacker Arsenal, artillery for cyber warriors. Visit us on hackerarsenal.com to check out our latest attack defense gadgets.